The waitress exposed the billionaire's priceless document in seconds. Nobody in the ballroom expected a waitress to walk away with the only truth that night. The crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across the ceiling of the Grand Wellington Hotel in Manhattan. Beneath them sat some of the most influential people in the country. Investors, collectors, attorneys, historians, men and women whose names appeared on magazine covers and charitable foundations. Their conversations blended into a soft hum of confidence and money. At the center of it all stood William Hayes, 42 years old, billionaire, tech visionary, one of the most respected private collectors in America. Tonight was supposed to be another triumph, a celebration, a moment that would be remembered for years. Behind him, protected inside a custom glass display case, rested what experts had called one of the most important historical discoveries of the decade. A document so rare that newspapers had described it as priceless. Cameras flashed. Guests gathered closer. Waiters moved quietly through the crowd, carrying silver trays of sparkling water and coffee. Among them was Emily Carter, 27. Blonde hair neatly tied back. Blue eyes calm and observant. She wore the same black uniform as every other server in the room. To most guests, she was invisible. Just another waitress working another event. Emily carefully balanced a tray as she moved between tables. She smiled politely, refilled glasses, collected empty cups, never drawing attention to herself. Yet unlike everyone else in the ballroom, she wasn't looking at William Hayes. She was looking at the document. Earlier that afternoon, she had noticed the display case being assembled. Since then, she had stolen brief glances whenever she passed. Not because she cared about the headlines. Not because she cared about the billionaire. Something about the document bothered her. She couldn't explain why. Not yet. The auction host stepped onto the stage. Applause filled the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "tonight we celebrate a piece of history valued at over $25 million. More applause followed. William smiled. Confident. Relaxed, certain. The host continued. "And because Mr. Hayes believes in transparency, he has prepared a special challenge. If anyone in this room can prove this document is not authentic, he will personally pay them $1 million. Laughter echoed across the ballroom. Guests exchanged amused looks. Historians smiled. Attorneys shook their heads. The challenge sounded generous, but everyone understood the truth. The document had already been authenticated by experts. The prize was safe. The room settled into comfortable certainty. William folded his arms. $1 million, he repeated with a grin. Anyone willing to try? Silence. Several seconds passed. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then, from the edge of the ballroom, a quiet voice broke through the stillness. May I take a look? Heads turned. Conversations stopped. The room froze. Standing beside a coffee station, still holding a serving tray, was Emily Carter, the waitress. For a moment, nobody moved. The silence felt heavier than the crystal chandeliers hanging overhead. Emily Carter stood perfectly still, her serving tray resting against her side. A few guests exchanged amused smiles. Others looked annoyed by the interruption. William Hayes studied her from across the room. He expected nervousness. He expected embarrassment. Instead, the young waitress met his gaze with quiet composure. The billionaire glanced around the ballroom and spread his hands slightly. You want to examine the document? He asked. A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd. Emily nodded once. If that is allowed. The host looked uncertain. Several guests chuckled openly now. One attorney whispered something to the person beside him and both shook their heads. William smiled. Not a cruel smile. More a smile of curiosity. Of course, he said. $1 million is available to anyone. Those are the rules. More laughter followed. Emily carefully placed her tray on a nearby service table and walked toward the stage. Her black uniform looked strangely out of place among the designer suits and evening gowns. Every eye followed her. She could feel it. The judgment. The assumptions. She had felt them before. Many times. Years ago, those looks used to bother her. Not anymore. The display case was unlocked. A specialist wearing white gloves carefully removed the document and placed it on a velvet-covered table. Emily stopped several feet away. She did not reach for it immediately. Instead, she studied it from a distance. William noticed something unusual. Most collectors rushed toward rare objects. Most experts could not wait to touch them. Emily simply observed. Her blue eyes moved slowly across the page. The edges, the folds, the seal, the ink. Tiny details most people would never notice. The room gradually became quiet again. 30 seconds passed. Then 60. Emily remained silent. William folded his arms. He suddenly found himself interested. "Do you collect historical documents?" he asked. "No," Emily replied softly. "Not anymore." The answer felt incomplete. William noticed that too. Before he could ask another question, one of the historians in attendance stepped forward. "Young lady," he said politely, "this document has already been authenticated by some of the finest experts in the country." Emily nodded. "I know. Then what exactly are you looking for?" Emily lowered her eyes to the lower corner of the page. "A reason that everyone else missed." Several guests laughed again. The historian smiled patiently. "And have you found one?" Emily did not answer right away. Her attention remained fixed on a tiny detail near the bottom edge of the paper. Something so small that nobody else in the room seemed aware of it. Finally, she looked up. Her expression had changed. The calm remained, but now there was certainty behind it. The ballroom grew still once more. William felt a strange tension settle into the room. Emily looked directly at him. Then she spoke 7 words that instantly erased every smile in the ballroom. "Mr. Hayes, who verified the fold pattern?" The question landed harder than anyone expected. The historian blinked. The auction host looked confused. Several guests exchanged uncertain glances. William Hayes slowly unfolded his arms. "The fold pattern?" he repeated. Emily nodded. "Yes, sir." The billionaire glanced toward a group of experts standing near the stage. "I assume they did." One of the authentication specialists stepped forward. He was a respected figure in the field, a man whose opinion could influence the value of artifacts worth millions. "The fold pattern was reviewed," he said confidently. "There were no concerns." Emily listened carefully. Then she looked back at the document. "May I ask how long?" The specialist frowned. "How long what?" "How long did the examination of the fold pattern take?" The man hesitated. "A few minutes." Emily nodded again. The answer seemed to confirm something. A faint murmur spread through the ballroom. William could feel the atmosphere changing. Earlier, people had been entertained. Now they were curious. Emily was no longer behaving like someone hoping to win $1 million. She was behaving like someone trying to understand a puzzle. "Please explain," William said. His voice was calm, but his interest was growing. Emily carefully pointed toward the lower corner of the document. The paper was supposedly folded and stored continuously for over 150 years. Several experts nodded. That was part of the documented history. Then the fold lines should show gradual aging consistent with the surrounding fibers. Emily continued. "Instead, this section shows compression that appears newer than the rest of the page." Silence. The specialist immediately shook his head. "That is impossible to determine without laboratory equipment." "Normally, yes," Emily replied softly, "but not when the difference is visible under ballroom lighting." The room became still again. William found himself staring at the exact area she indicated. He could not see anything unusual. Most guests could not either. Yet the confidence in her voice was unsettling. The specialist stepped closer to the document. Another expert joined him. Then another. Their faces remained professional. But William noticed something. None of them were smiling anymore. Minutes earlier, they had treated the waitress like a harmless interruption. Now they were studying the paper with growing concentration. Emily stepped back. She did not attempt to defend herself. She did not argue. She simply waited. The chandelier light reflected across the glass display case. Somewhere in the ballroom, a coffee cup touched a saucer with a soft click. Nobody seemed willing to speak above a whisper. William checked his Swiss watch. 30 seconds passed. Then 60. Finally, one of the experts adjusted his glasses and leaned closer. His expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. But William saw it. The same man who had dismissed Emily moments ago now looked uncertain. Another specialist requested a magnifier. A third asked for additional photographs taken during the original authentication process. The tension in the room tightened. Emily remained motionless near the edge of the stage. Invisible no longer. William looked at her carefully. For the first time that evening, he stopped seeing a waitress. And for the first time, a troubling thought entered his mind. What if she was not searching for a flaw? What if she had already found one? The experts gathered closer around the velvet-covered table. Their earlier confidence had faded into concentration. One requested high-resolution photographs from the original authentication process. Another compared the images on a tablet to the document lying under the ballroom lights. The guests watched in silence. Nobody was laughing now. William Hayes remained near the display case, his expression carefully controlled, but inside he felt something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. For nearly a year, this document had been the crown jewel of his collection. Museums had praised it. Journalists had written about it. Investors and historians had congratulated him. Yet a waitress had managed to create doubt in less than 5 minutes. Emily stood quietly beside the stage. She did not look triumphant. She did not look nervous. She simply watched, as though the answer mattered more than being right. One of the senior experts suddenly frowned. "Zoom in on that image," he said. The technician enlarged a photograph taken 6 months earlier. The room leaned closer. William noticed the man's jaw tighten slightly. "What is it?" William asked. The expert hesitated. "There appears to be a difference." A murmur spread through the crowd. "Difference?" William repeated. "The fold line," the expert said. "In this older photograph, the compression pattern is not identical." The ballroom became perfectly still. Emily lowered her eyes briefly, not in satisfaction, more like confirmation. Another specialist stepped forward. "Paper fibers do not change this way under normal preservation conditions." He pointed toward the enlarged image. Something happened between the original examination and today. William felt dozens of eyes turning toward him. The billionaire straightened his shoulders. "Are you suggesting the document was altered?" Nobody answered immediately. That silence felt louder than any accusation. The host shifted uneasily. Several guests whispered among themselves. A collector seated near the front removed his glasses and rubbed his forehead. Millions of dollars in value suddenly seemed less certain. Then Emily spoke. Her voice remained calm. "I do not think the document was altered recently." Every head turned toward her. William narrowed his eyes. "Then what do you think happened?" Emily looked at the paper. "I think someone copied an existing fold pattern and made one small mistake." The statement landed like a stone dropped into still water. A historian shook his head. "That would require extraordinary skill." "Yes," Emily replied. "It would." Another expert examined the corner she had identified. This time he used a specialized magnifier. 30 seconds passed. Then his expression changed. William saw it immediately. The man looked up slowly. "There is a secondary crease." The room erupted into whispers. "A secondary crease?" someone repeated. The expert nodded. "A machine-generated pressure mark beneath the visible fold." He swallowed. "It should not be there." William stared at the document. For the first time that evening, he no longer saw a priceless treasure. He saw a question, a dangerous one, and as the whispers grew louder around the ballroom, he realized something even more unsettling. Emily Carter had not reached her conclusion by luck. She had known exactly where to look. The ballroom no longer felt like a celebration, felt like an investigation. Guests who had arrived expecting champagne and speeches now stood clustered in quiet circles. watching every movement around the stage. The experts continued examining the document while reporters discreetly opened their phones beneath the tables. William Hayes remained silent. His confidence had not disappeared, but it had changed shape. Earlier, he had been certain. Now he wanted answers. One of the specialists carefully set down the magnifier and looked toward Emily. "How did you notice it?" he asked. The question carried no sarcasm this time, only genuine curiosity. Emily hesitated. She was not comfortable being the center of attention. Yet hundreds of eyes were already fixed on her. "Because I was looking at the wrong thing," she said quietly. Several people frowned. The specialist tilted his head. "What does that mean?" Emily glanced toward the document. "Most people study the writing, the signatures, the seal, the historical importance. I was looking at the stress marks in the paper." A historian folded his arms. "Why?" Emily smiled faintly. "Because paper does not care about reputation." The room became still again. The answer sounded simple, but something about it resonated. William found himself listening more carefully than ever. Emily continued, "A forged signature can fool people. A forged seal can fool people. Even ink can be replicated. But paper records every touch, every fold, every year." Several experts exchanged thoughtful looks. One slowly nodded. Another returned to the document and examined the corner once more. The senior specialist cleared his throat. "Miss Carter, have you worked in authentication before?" Emily lowered her eyes. "A long time ago." The answer raised more questions than it answered. William noticed it immediately. "How long ago?" he asked. Emily looked at him. For the first time all evening, there was a trace of sadness behind her calm expression. "Before my father became sick." The billionaire said nothing. Neither did anyone else. The room seemed to understand that the story behind those words was larger than she wished to share. A few moments later, another expert received a message on his tablet. He read it once, then again. His expression tightened. "We have a problem." Every conversation in the ballroom stopped. William stepped closer. "What kind of problem?" The expert turned the screen toward the group. "The preservation photographs from the original archive." He pointed at a date stamp. "These images were taken before the document entered private circulation." William stared at the screen. The fold pattern was visible, clear, undeniable, different, not slightly different, completely different. A wave of whispers swept across the ballroom. Emily remained motionless. She had not celebrated. She had not claimed victory. She simply watched the evidence speak for itself. Then the expert said the words nobody had expected to hear that night. Miss Carter was right. The fold pattern could not have originated from the original document. And suddenly the $1,000,000 challenge no longer felt like a publicity stunt. Felt very real. The announcement changed everything. The ballroom that had once echoed with confidence now felt restrained, almost cautious. Nobody wanted to be the first to speak. Nobody wanted to guess what the final answer might be. William Hayes looked at the document again. It was the same piece of paper he had admired for months. The same artifact he had ensured, displayed, and defended. Yet somehow it looked different now. Not because it had changed. Because he had. The billionaire turned toward Emily. "When did you realize something was wrong?" Emily paused before answering. "About 3 seconds after I saw it." A soft wave of surprise moved through the crowd. William stared at her. 3 seconds. Emily nodded. "The fold pattern caught my attention immediately." One of the historians shook his head in disbelief. "Most experts spent weeks examining this piece." "They were examining history," Emily replied gently. "I was examining paper." Again the room fell silent. Her words carried no arrogance. That made them even more powerful. Nearby, another authentication specialist continued reviewing archival records. His fingers moved rapidly across the tablet screen. Then suddenly he stopped. His eyes widened. "There is something else." Every head turned. The specialist enlarged an image from the archive. This photograph was taken before the document entered the private market. He pointed toward the lower edge. There is a watermark. William frowned. I do not see one. Because it is only visible under certain lighting conditions, the specialist explained. But it appears in the original image. He switched to a current photograph of the document. The watermark was gone. A murmur swept through the ballroom. Emily closed her eyes briefly. Not from surprise. From recognition. William noticed. You expected that, he said quietly. Emily met his gaze. I hoped I was wrong. For the first time all evening, William felt no defensiveness. Only curiosity. How? He asked. How could you possibly notice all of this? Emily looked toward the document once more. The chandelier light reflected across the glass case beside it. Tiny reflections danced across the polished floor. My father taught me, she said softly. He restored historical manuscripts for museums. Several guests leaned forward. Emily rarely volunteered personal information, but somehow the story was beginning to reveal itself. When I was 12 years old, he showed me 2 documents that looked identical. Everyone in the room chose the wrong one. A faint smile touched her face. Then he taught me something I never forgot. William listened carefully. What was it? Emily looked around the ballroom. At the experts, the collectors, the executives, the reporters, then back at William. People see what they expect to see. Nobody spoke. The words lingered in the air. Heavy, true, uncomfortable. At that exact moment, another message arrived on the specialist's tablet. He opened it. Read it once. Then a second time. His face lost color. Slowly, he looked up at William Hayes. Sir, he said, the laboratory has completed an emergency comparison. The entire ballroom seemed to stop breathing. And? William asked. The specialist swallowed. The document paper is authentic. Relief flashed across several faces, but it lasted less than a second. Because the specialist continued. The writing is not. The words hit the ballroom with more force than anyone expected. The paper was authentic. The writing was not. For several seconds, nobody reacted. The distinction sounded small, technical, academic. Then the meaning settled over the room. An authentic sheet of historical paper with inauthentic writing was not a priceless discovery. It was a sophisticated forgery, a masterpiece of deception. William Hayes remained motionless. His face revealed almost nothing, but those who knew him understood what that silence meant. He was thinking, calculating, rebuilding every assumption he had made about the document. Across the ballroom, reporters stopped pretending not to listen. Historians exchanged tense whispers. Collectors stared at the display table as though it had transformed before their eyes. One of the specialists cleared his throat. The laboratory compared microscopic ink characteristics against archived reference samples. He looked down at the report. The composition is remarkably convincing, but several elements do not match the period. Another expert nodded. Someone used authentic historical paper and modern reconstruction techniques. The room seemed smaller now, tighter. Emily listened quietly. Her expression remained calm, but inside she felt something else. Relief. Not because she had been proven right, because the truth had finally surfaced. William slowly turned toward her. You knew. It was not an accusation. It was a realization. Emily shook her head. No, sir. Then how did you keep seeing things everyone else missed? Emily glanced toward the document. Because I was not looking for proof that it was real. The billionaire narrowed his eyes slightly. What were you looking for? Emily answered without hesitation. A reason to doubt it. The simplicity of the response surprised him. Most experts had spent months trying to confirm authenticity. Emily had approached the problem from the opposite direction. One of the historians suddenly laughed. Not mockingly, admiringly. That is what we teach graduate students, he said. Question your assumptions. He looked around the room. The rest of us forgot. A few embarrassed smiles appeared among the specialists. Nobody argued. They knew he was right. William looked at Emily again. For the first time that evening, He no longer saw a waitress standing near the stage. He saw someone who belonged in the conversation. Someone whose insight had changed the course of the night. "Who are you, Emily Carter?" he asked quietly. The question carried through the ballroom. Emily hesitated. She had spent years avoiding that question. Years choosing anonymity over attention. Yet there was no avoiding it now. "My father restored historical manuscripts," she said softly. "I spent most of my childhood in archives instead of playgrounds." Several guests smiled. The image felt unexpectedly human. "Later, I studied preservation science." A murmur moved through the crowd. William noticed it immediately. Suddenly the pieces were beginning to fit together. And then, Emily looked down for a moment. Life happened. No dramatic speech followed. No detailed explanation. Yet everyone understood. Dreams interrupted. Plans postponed. Responsibilities that changed everything. The chandelier light reflected in the glass case beside the document. The room remained quiet. Then another specialist stepped forward holding a newly arrived report. He looked directly at William Hayes. His expression was serious. "Sir," he said, "there is one more finding." William felt the tension return instantly. "What is it?" The specialist took a slow breath. "We may have identified the person who created the forgery." The announcement sent another wave of whispers through the ballroom. A moment ago, the mystery had centered on the document. Now it centered on a person. William Hayes looked directly at the specialist. "You identified the forger?" The expert shook his head carefully. "Not with complete certainty, but we identified a likely source." He turned the tablet around so the other specialists could see. Several immediately recognized the name. Their expressions changed. Not shock, recognition. The kind that comes when a missing piece finally slides into place. "Who is it?" someone in the crowd asked. The specialist took a breath. "A restoration consultant who worked with several private collections over the past decade." Murmurs spread instantly. William studied the information on the screen. The name meant little to him, but it clearly meant something to the experts. "Explain," he said. One of the historians stepped forward. "He had a reputation." "A bad one?" asked a collector. The historian hesitated. "A complicated one." The ballroom remained silent. His restorations were brilliant, almost impossible to distinguish from original materials. Some museums praised him. Others refused to work with him. Emily listened quietly from the side of the stage. Something about the name seemed familiar. Not important, just distant. Like a memory she could not quite reach. The specialist continued. "Several techniques found in this document closely resemble methods associated with his work." William looked toward the display table. "Then why was this never discovered?" Nobody answered immediately. Finally, Emily did. "Because everyone trusted the story." The room turned toward her again. She continued softly. "The document had the right history, the right owners, the right experts, the right publicity." She glanced at the glass case. Once enough people believe something is valuable, they stop questioning it. A few uncomfortable smiles appeared around the room. The statement was difficult to argue with. William slowly nodded. He understood exactly what she meant. He had trusted the reputation surrounding the artifact long before he ever saw it himself. The specialist suddenly zoomed in on another image. "There is something else." Everyone leaned forward. He pointed to a tiny mark hidden near the edge of the page. Barely visible. Almost insignificant. This symbol appeared in two other disputed documents connected to the same consultant. The room grew quiet once more. William stared at the image. Emily stepped closer. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Then she froze. Not dramatically. Just enough for William to notice. "You recognize it?" he asked. Emily did not answer immediately. Her heartbeat quickened. Memories surfaced. Long afternoons in archives. Dusty restoration tables. Her father's voice explaining how craftsmen sometimes left invisible signatures inside their work. The symbol on the screen was not unfamiliar. She had seen it before. Years ago. Somewhere she never expected to remember. Slowly, Emily lifted her eyes toward the specialist. Can you enlarge that image? The symbol expanded across the screen. The moment she saw it clearly, all uncertainty disappeared. The ballroom waited. William watched her expression carefully. Then Emily spoke 4 words that changed the direction of the entire investigation. I know where that came from. The ballroom held its breath. Emily Carter stood beneath the chandelier light, her eyes fixed on the enlarged symbol displayed across the screen. William Hayes watched her carefully. The confidence in her voice was different now. This was no longer observation. It was recognition. Where? William asked quietly. Emily looked at the symbol again. My father showed it to me when I was 14. A murmur moved through the crowd. The specialists exchanged surprised glances. Emily continued. He called it a craftsman's fingerprint. The room remained silent. Some restorers leave tiny marks hidden within their work. Not signatures anyone would notice. Just details that help them identify their own restorations years later. One of the historians nodded slowly. That practice exists. Emily pointed toward the screen. This symbol was discussed in a conference paper decades ago. My father kept a copy. The specialist immediately searched through several databases. His fingers moved rapidly. Seconds later, another document appeared on the screen. Then another. The comparison was unmistakable. The same tiny symbol appeared in multiple disputed works connected to the consultant. The ballroom erupted into whispers. This time there was no doubt. The evidence was beginning to align. William looked at the display table one final time. The document that had once represented prestige and certainty now represented something else. A lesson. A costly one. Yet strangely, he felt less concerned about the money than the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, the senior specialist announced, we cannot complete a full legal determination tonight. However, based on the archival evidence, laboratory findings, and newly identified markers, we no longer consider this document authentic in its current form. Silence followed. Deep, complete. Then William Hayes did something nobody expected. He stepped away from the stage, walked across the ballroom, and stopped in front of Emily Carter. Hundreds of eyes followed him. Emily looked uncertain for the first time all evening. William extended his hand. Miss Carter, he said, you accepted a challenge nobody else was willing to accept. The room remained still. You protected the truth when the rest of us protected our assumptions. Emily shook his hand. Her expression remained humble. I only asked questions. William smiled faintly. Exactly. Soft laughter spread through the crowd. Not mocking laughter. Respectful laughter. The kind that arrives when people recognize a simple truth. William then turned toward the audience. The $1 million prize will be honored. Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom. Emily immediately shook her head. I did not do this for money. William nodded. I know. He paused. Which is precisely why you earned it. The applause started slowly. One person, then another. Soon the entire ballroom was standing. Historians, collectors, executives, reporters, everyone. Emily stood quietly as the sound filled the room. She did not look victorious. She looked thoughtful, as though she already understood something the others were only beginning to learn. Later, long after the guests had left and the lights had begun to dim, the priceless document was gone from the display case. But the lesson remained. People often trust titles, wealth, reputation, appearances. Yet on that night, the person who saw the truth first was not the billionaire. Not the experts. Not the collectors. It was the waitress carrying a coffee tray. Because intelligence does not announce itself. Sometimes it simply notices what everyone else forgot to see.